Thank you, Kelly and Michelle. Last weekend, the youth were away through Sunday or just after the service on fall retreat, and we've got 4 of our 6 now are in student ministry. So that left me and Caroline last weekend, Friday through Sunday, with just Peter and John. On Thursday, before the teenagers left to go, I had seen online there was an ad that popped up for this family fall event down at the Denton Farm Park, which is just outside of the town of Denton, which is kind of close to Asheboro. And it described how there were going to be inflatables, and there was a petting zoo, and there was hayride and corn maze and vendors and just everything fall related. And I told Caroline about that, and she said, "Oh, that sounds pretty good. You know, we kind of forget sometimes that we still have some little ones, and we need to be still doing special stuff with them as well." So we decided, hey, that's what we're going to do. So last Saturday, we get up, we have breakfast, and we get down there, and I think it started around a little after 10. We get there 10:30, 10:40, and at first we're like, oh, there's just not many people here. And so it doesn't make any difference. It's a beautiful day. We'll just start doing stuff. And we go to the petting zoo, and we see some of the animals that are over there. We pass by some of the vendors. There's inflatables that the boys hang out with, playing for a while. We do the hayride. And as we're doing the hayride, one of the things that we are kind of keeping our eyes peeled for is the corn maze, because it said there was a corn maze, and we keep looking for it. And we saw a corn maze, and you'll see a picture in just a second, but we oh, that's too, he beat me to it. This is what we saw. And we thought, maybe, could that be the corn? Surely not. And Caroline's like, I don't know, there's an entrance. That doesn't bode well. And so they had an information booth, and Caroline said, if that's it, I'm going to make them actually say it. And so she goes over there to them, and she says, it said something about a corn maze. Where is the corn maze? And they seemed kind of ignorant at first, and then they finally said, oh, that's it. Deep breath. We didn't lose either Peter or John. I know you were concerned about that. It was tough. That they went in. They came out. We actually have I didn't put that in there. We had a video. It took 9 whole seconds. 9 whole seconds for them to do the corn maze. Needless to say, when we saw the corn maze, we were surprised. We were surprised. But the truth is, in life, there's all kinds of surprises, aren't there? And there's pleasant surprises, there's unpleasant surprises. All kinds of things catch us off guard. And whether the surprise we deem it to be positive or negative or whatever category it's in, there is a common thread that all surprises share in common. And that's this. It is our response when our experience is different than what we expected. And so all of us, in every aspect and facet of life, we're operating based on some anticipation, some measure of expectation. And when the reality becomes different than what we expected or anticipated, we are surprised. We are shocked. Now, people shock us all the time. News shocks us all the time. Corn mazes shock us even. All kinds of stuff can shock us and surprise us. But I want you to understand also, even as those that are followers of God, and though the Bible tells us that God does not change, and He does not, consistently and regularly, as you follow Him, you're going to be surprised by God. He's going to do things that are very different than your expectation. Now, I'm going to be honest with you and say, I don't really like that. Maybe you're the same way. I like the predictable. I like being able to anticipate. I'm not a big surprise fan. But whether you like it or not, consistently and regularly, God operates in ways that are surprising to us. But here's the question. Why does He do that? Why does He do it today? And we see the answer to that from seeing why He did it, I believe, even back then. Why does God operate in ways that surprise us? We see the answer to that question in Judges chapter 7. Judges chapter 7, as we keep walking through the life of Gideon, Starting in verse 1 of chapter 7, we're told that Zerubbabel, that is Gideon, and all the troops who were with him, they got up early and camped beside the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them, below the hill of Morah in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, "You have too many troops for me to hand the Midianites over to them, or else Israel might elevate themselves over me and say, 'My own strength saved me.' Now announce to the troops, 'Whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead.' So 22,000 of the troops turned back, but 10,000 remained. Then the Lord said to Gideon, 'There are still too many troops. Take them down to the water. I will test them for you there. If I say to you, this one can go with you, he can go. But if I say to you about anyone, this one cannot go with you, he cannot go.' So he brought the troops down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, 'Separate everyone who laps water with his tongue like a dog. Do the same with everyone who kneels to drink.' The number of those who lapped with their hands to their mouths was 300 men, and all the rest of the troops knelt to drink water. And the Lord said to Gideon, 'I will deliver you with 300 men who lapped and hand the Midianites over to you, but everyone else is to go home.' So Gideon sent all the Israelites to their tents, but kept 300 troops who took the provisions and their trumpets. The camp of Midian was below him in the valley." The passage we just read doesn't use the word surprise, but the truth is it doesn't have to use the word surprise for us to know that Gideon was absolutely surprised by what God did on that day. He operated in ways that were vastly different than what he expected, and the truth is God still does that today. And trying to see why it was that God did this then will help me, and it'll help you understand why he does this today. So why does he operate in these surprising ways? What's with all the surprises? Well, I think based on what we see here, and as we begin to unpack this passage, we'll see that one of the reasons that God operates this way is because he's greater than our logic. He is greater than our logic. As we've been walking through this, we keep reminding ourselves of context. And what has happened is that the children of Israel have been acting like their pagan neighbors. And so God has used the Midianites, this enemy nation, to serve as corrective disciplinary action on them. And how it worked is that for a period of 7 years, on a frequent basis, when Israel least expected it, they would show up and they would steal and take and plunder anything and everything that they wanted. And so as this keeps going on year after year, Israel keeps getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. Their harvests are tiny. They have no stores left. They have no storage left. And they are just hiding anything they possibly can to be able to get by. Finally, they turn back to God and they ask for God's help. And God responds by raising up among them this young guy named Gideon. He's from an inconsequential small family, from an inconsequential tribe, and he is confirmed repeatedly. And we've seen that as we've spent some weeks looking over the last couple of chapters. We've seen how God has confirmed, Gideon, this is what I want you to do. Finally, it is time for action. And this is going to be a military operation. Israel does, they've got to overthrow, cast off, and deal with the Midianites. It's a military operation. Now, we're not told the number in this passage, but in chapter 8, we find out that the Midianites and their cronies number 135,000. That's not 1,000,000 troops, but 135,000 is not an insignificant number of soldiers. And keep in mind, compared to Israel, these 135,000 are well fed. They're well equipped. Why? Because they've got Israel's food. They've got Israel's armament. They've got Israel's equipment. And so you've got this Israelite army now that's just kind of ragtag, and whatever they've been able to hide, whatever stick or rock they've been able to hide, that's all that they've got. They're hungry. They're not particularly well nourished. They are in a very weakened position. But now God is saying, and he's using Gideon to say, it's time finally to act. We're told, based on the numbers that we see here in verse 3, that Gideon's army, as all these Israelites have been summoned, they number 32,000. 32,000. And so that makes the odds a little worse than 4-1. Now, let's say you plan on getting in a fight in the not-so-distant future, and the odds are one of you against 4 others. You're probably going to say, I don't think I want to sign up for that fight. You don't intentionally pursue that type of fight. You wind up in a fight like that. And so as Gideon is aware of the scope, the scale, and the size of the enemy, he looks at his troops, and it's wonderful he's got 32,000. I mean, that's great until you consider there's 135,000 that are better equipped, better armed, and better prepared waiting for them. That kind of stinks. So if you are Gideon, if you are one of these other soldiers, one of the 32,000 that are there, you're probably thinking what? You're probably thinking, what is it that we can do? Can we send out an email or a text? Can we put a note on Facebook, something, so that maybe we can get some more of our people to come help us? You're probably thinking, what we need is more. More. That's the expectation. That's the thought you're operating with. And what does God say in verse 2 to Gideon? You've got too many. What? Too many what? Certainly not too many troops. Certainly not too many people. Too many what? God says, you've got too many people for me to hand the Midianites over to you, because if I do, you're going to say, look at what we did. Gideon is thinking, the rest of the soldiers are probably thinking, I wonder who else I could call, or we could maybe draft or enlist into this experience. And God says, you've got too many. Well, that's surprise number one. And so Gideon is told by God to announce to the troops, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So God says, dismiss those that are scared. And if you're Gideon, and if you've heard this instruction from God, I don't know about you, but I think I would mumble that instruction. How about you? So you're scared, you're scared, go home. What? I'm scared, just go back home. You know, hoping against hope that no one would actually hear it. But Gideon announces, hey, if there's anyone who is afraid, and you've got to think maybe he's hoping that just by virtue of stating it this way, that all these guys are going to kind of square their shoulders back, and they're going to muster their courage and get real strong and courageous. If there's anybody that's scared, you can go on home. And you got to think Gideon's probably thinking, okay, nobody, it's just going to be crickets. Everybody's going to stand there at attention. And I don't know how it worked. I don't know if it was en masse or it started with one, but then the floodgates opened. He started with 32,000, and by the time the walking away stops, there's 10,000. So things started, it was a little worse than 4-1. Now it's 13-1. Do you intentionally pursue a fight when you know that for every one of you, there's 13 of them? No. Again, you stumble into that type of thing. You don't certainly advance into this. And at this point, God speaks again. In verse 4, he says what? There are still too many troops. Again, this is a military operation. This is not preparing for Thanksgiving. This is not a catering operation. This is a fight. You need as many as you possibly can. Because even if you've got weaker guys, if you have enough numbers, maybe somehow you're going to be able to be victorious. And probably when the odds were 4-1, you had those guys thinking, well, I probably need to probably go ahead and write my will out. This doesn't look good. It may be a bloodbath, but maybe, just maybe, we're going to be able to win. But now when 22,000 have left and it's just 10, everybody's probably going, ooh, what are we going to do now? And you've got to think that Gideon is looking towards heaven, and if he's not saying it, he's got to be thinking it. What are you thinking? This makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. 13-1? Those are bad enough odds, and you're still saying that's too many. That doesn't make one bit of sense. And in very simple terms, we have God telling his people, I want you to do something. I am tasking you with this. And what he says from human reasoning, from human logic, from human perspective, from any rational cognitive thought, this is dumb. This is colossally foolish. This makes no sense whatsoever. And yet, what? God is saying, do it. You still got too many. We need fewer and fewer and fewer. This defies logic. Why would God operate in such a surprising fashion? Because, very frankly, He is greater than our logic. He's greater than our ability to say, oh, that makes sense. I don't know about you, but I have always been kind of a sucker for magic. I've never been somebody that could do many magic tricks at all. But it doesn't make a difference what it is. I mean, especially the small sleight of hand stuff. I love coin tricks. I love card tricks. If you see those either in person or on TV, I love seeing that stuff. I'm just kind of mesmerized and amazed by it. But there are stacks of people around the world that are really good at this. But then, all of us have had somebody. Maybe you went to church with them. Maybe you were this guy. I don't know. I went to church with a stack of these people that were magicians in their own right. And their favorite trick was what? Making your nose disappear. Well, that was a great one, wasn't it? Honestly, I don't remember how many times this happened. You'd go, I was just a little kid, and somebody, I'm going to make your nose disappear. Ooh, I got it. I'm like 4, and I'm like, really? Really? You may have my nose, but I can still tell this trick stinks. Thank you. That was good. I don't know, sincerely, I know that there were multiplied people that did that trick to me, but honestly, to this day, I can't tell you a single one of those people. So many did it. Nobody's talking about whoever came up with that, right? Just this past week, there was a magician who died 97 years ago, this past Tuesday, and we're still talking about him. His name, in fact, we don't even have to pay attention to his first name. We just know him by his last name. Houdini. Houdini died 97 years ago this past Tuesday, and what are we doing? We're still talking about him. Why? Because the stuff that he did wasn't that. The people are still trying to figure out how exactly did he do this? Why are we still talking about this? Because it defies our ability to get our arms around. It defies our ability for that to completely make sense, how he could get out of some contraption, how he could get out of some encapsulation, how in the world this could possibly, it just doesn't make sense. And so what do we do? We are still talking about it. Listen, God consistently and regularly operates in my life and in your life where He calls me and where He calls you to something that from your coworker's perspective, from your maybe even your family member's perspective, even perhaps from your own perspective, you're like, this doesn't make sense. And maybe like Gideon, God confirms it over and over and over again. And there's no doubt in your mind, this is what God wants me to be about. But you're like, this is dumb. The odds are completely stacked against me. There's no way on earth that this could possibly work. There's no way, this just doesn't make sense. And yet you know God is in it. Why would God do this? The same reason that we're talking about Houdini today. God knows that we'll be celebrating and talking about that which is beyond our ability to get. And He wants you, He wants me, as He wanted Gideon, to understand He's greater than your ability, my ability, even our collective ability to reason out and say, oh, this. No, He's greater than that. Everything that we've been singing about today has been talking about how God is superior, how He's greater than us. And one of the things that He wants to demonstrate is that He's greater than our ability to rationalize stuff and figure out stuff. And so in terms of practical application, what does this do? I think one of the things that it tells you is this: God may very well call you to something. In fact, perhaps it is He's putting a burden on your heart, and He has been doing so for weeks, and you're like, I don't know if I can do this. That seems so Makes sense. Why would God lead me to do this? That's going to cost this opportunity. That's going to cost this money. That's going to cost this time. That's going to cost this relationship. Why in the world would God ever do that? That doesn't make sense. But I'm telling you, consistently, God is in the stuff that doesn't make sense from our perspective because He's greater than our logic. That's why He loves surprises. Not only because He's greater than our logic, but because He's greater than our abilities. He's greater than our abilities. At this point, Gideon is the commander of an army of 10,000. So it's 13-1. That's no good. And God still says it's too many. It's too many. And God informs Gideon, hey, I need to winnow this group down even smaller. And so he says, I'll tell you what the test is to do. And so what I want you to do is to go and send the guys down to this whatever body of water, this creek, this river, this whatever it is. Send them down and pay attention to how they drink. And so God says, I want you to separate. Ultimately, they're going to fall into one of two groups. I want you to separate those that just get down and put their face in the water and just kind of gulp it up from those who get down on one knee and use their hand to lap it up. And so that creates two groups, 300 and 9,700. What do you think Gideon thinks? All right, me and the 9,700 are going to go. I really believe fully, and the text doesn't tell us, I believe sincerely, as he looks at those two groups, he thinks that's the one that he's going to go with. And God says, no, I want you to go with the group of 300. 300? Are you kidding me? I thought the other was illogical. I think the other doesn't, but 300? Now, I don't know about you. I have heard this story since childhood, and I remember even in children's Sunday school classes, and I've heard other adults describe this, and there are commentators that suggest this, and they say the reason is, and what was going on is that God was helping to winnow this group by showing Gideon the guys that could be trusted, that were wise, and they were keeping lookout for the enemy by scoop. You've heard this? And so they're keeping on guard, and the others are just like gobble, 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 lapping up like a dog. Is that right? I don't think there's a bit of truth in that. I do know this. There's not a bit of scripture in that. That's pure speculation, absolute pure speculation. In fact, I don't think that either one of the ways was wrong. I don't think it was wrong to do this. I don't think it was wrong to lap it up. In fact, I don't think God was interested in trying to lead Gideon to the wise soldiers. I think he just wanted a small group to work with, and this was an easy way to do it. Because God wasn't interested in showing how wise a group of 300 skillful lookouts were going to be. God was interested in demonstrating not any of their abilities, not any of their logic, not any of their abilities. He was interested in demonstrating His greatness. And this was an easy way to take a group from 10,000 down to 300. The odds now are what? 450 to 1? It's terrible. It's terrible. Why would God do that? 450 to 1 when God says, okay, that's the right number. Can you imagine what Gideon is thinking? I thought it was crazy to begin with. But why would God operate in such a surprising fashion? Because how He operated then, He still operates today. And that is that He is interested in demonstrating not my abilities, not your accomplishments, but He's interested in demonstrating His greatness. And the only way that He can do that is when we see the extent of our limitation. We use a whole stack of batteries on a regular basis. There's a lot of wireless mics that we use. What I've got wearing right now, there's 2 AA's in there. And so we have been for years using gobs and gobs and gobs and gobs of batteries. So a number of weeks ago, I'd done some research online and found out that there's some lithium rechargeable batteries. It used to be you couldn't find them in AA or AAA, but now you can. And there's a lot of positives to them. For one thing, they hold a lot of power, and so they will last longer than a typical alkaline. They produce consistently high power so that the power doesn't decrease or wane. And they're not like old rechargeable batteries where they develop like a memory. And so everything about that is a win. That's on the positive side. But here's the negative side. Lithium batteries, when they die, they don't just they're not just going and say, man, I'm just getting tired, I'm going to slow down. Lithium batteries are running and collapse. They're running at full strength and then just die. And so a few weeks ago, there was, I don't know if you noticed, Robbie sent Philip up here. A couple of praise team microphones died during the service. And here's the problem. In the back, the receivers show how strong the batteries are in these wireless mics. And lithium batteries, until they die, they show full strength. And then they show no strength. And so we just plan now every couple of weeks we change these. They'll last more than a month, but we're going to change them every 2 weeks. But the problem, again, is this. They're going, and then just stop. And the meter says full strength, when it actually has almost nothing. Can we just be honest and say that we're a lot like lithium batteries? We just are. Now, we wouldn't necessarily carry the coffee mug that says, I can do everything. We wouldn't necessarily wear the shirt that says, I'm the cat's meow, but we sure act like that, don't we? And consistently, we operate as though there ain't no mountain high enough. There's nothing that we can't figure out. There's nothing that we cannot, with our ingenuity, there's nothing that we cannot, by our sheer effort and willpower, we can just somehow, some way, figure out a way, and we'll get through this somehow. We'll figure it out, and we will do that. I mean, our society, our culture celebrates consistently this sense of rugged individualism, and we pat each other on the back for this. Until all of a sudden you realize, yeah, I got no ability. I can't do this. What God was doing was dealing with his people then, who were no different than we are today, whose meter is saying, boy, I can do anything. And he's leading them to see, you can't do anything. There's no way that this can happen on you. It can only happen with me. Listen, God has consistently operated in this fashion. This is not anything new. You see it throughout the whole of Scripture. God operates in surprising ways where he'll take, from a logical perspective, what doesn't make sense. You remember when he chose the second king of Israel? Even when he chose the first king of Israel, there's nothing about why Saul was chosen. And with respect to Jesse's children, the youngest, the one that doesn't look like the king, the one that's out there tending the sheep, we're going to make him the king? Doesn't make any sense. What about when Elijah is going toe-to-toe with 450 prophets of Baal? Those are some bad odds. And if it doesn't bode well, Elijah dies that day on Mount Carmel. But it was 1 versus 450, but 1 is okay so long as God's on that side. You see God in the New Testament doing what? You've got somebody like Saul, who is an absolute persecutor of the church, who's actively engaged in the prospect of killing Christians, and God uses what? Uses that guy to become the greatest missionary in the history of the Christian church. What I'm saying is that God consistently operates in surprising ways that are greater than our logic and greater than our abilities. Why? Why? I'll tell you. You see this in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. And Paul is telling these Corinthian believers, he says this, I want you to know about the trouble that came to us in Asia, so that we were perplexed, so that we were stressed beyond measure and above strength, so that, these are Paul's words, that we despaired even of life. So he says, we were pressed above strength and beyond measure. It was more than we could stand. God allowed us to experience in Asia more than we could bear. More than our strength. More than our ability. Such that things were so bad, we would wake up in the morning and say, hoping I wouldn't wake up. It was that bad. And Paul says that God did this, why? You can read it for yourself, 2 Corinthians 1 verse 9. That God did this so that we would not trust in ourselves, but in God. At the end of the day, I can answer the question with one word. Why does God operate in ways that surprise us? Trust. Trust. And what he's wanting from me, from you, is that we place, that we posit our trust not in me, but in him. Because when my trust is in him, when he operates in ways that are different than I expect, and he leads me to do something that doesn't make sense, I will still follow because I trust him, knowing he's greater than my logic. When he leads me to a task that is greater than my ability, I still follow because I trust him, knowing that he is greater than what I, and can accomplish what I never, ever could. It's all about trust. You bow your heads with me?